You explained your idea perfectly. The data was solid. Every objection answered before it was even raised. And somehow the room still said no. If you've ever walked out of a meeting knowing you were right and still lost the room, stay with me. Because what just happened to you has a name, and it's been happening to smart, capable people for as long as there've been meetings to walk out of. Here's what nobody tells you when you step into a room full of decision makers. Being right is not the same as winning. And the gap between those two things is where careers quietly stall out. Not with some dramatic failure, just a slow drift toward being the person whose ideas get noted and never chosen. This isn't about confidence. It isn't about being louder or smarter or more prepared. It's about one of the unwritten rules nobody hands you when you get promoted. The kind of pattern that repeats itself in every office, in every decade, whether the argument is about a budget, a hire, or a 5-year plan. I'm going to walk you through exactly why the best argument in the room so often loses. And near the end, I'll show you the one shift that turns your next disagreement into an almost automatic win. Somewhere in the middle of this, you'll hear about two brothers who spent years being told, in print, that they were lying about something they'd already done, and how they answered that. Not with a rebuttal, with a wing. Quick thing before we get into it. If you're the type who likes having this kind of thing in your back pocket before a big meeting, hit like now so it's easier to find later. Okay, let's get into it. Think about the last time you tried to change someone's mind at work. You probably built a case, bullet points, maybe a slide. You anticipated the pushback and prepared for it. Picture it. You're 2 minutes in. You deliver the strongest part of your case, the part you rehearsed in the shower, and you watch the other person's arms fold. Not because your logic was weak, because you'd just done something that, underneath all the politeness, feels like a quiet challenge to their judgment. Here's the dangerous part. The better your argument, the more resistance it can create. Because a strong argument doesn't just present a fact. It quietly announces that the other person hadn't thought of it. And almost nobody enjoys being shown that in real time, especially not a boss, a client, or a peer who's used to being the one doing the explaining. Maybe you've done this to someone, pushed your case so hard the room went quiet in the wrong way. Or maybe it's been done to you, someone with fewer credentials, weaker logic, but sharper instincts, quietly outpositioned you, and you didn't understand how until months later, when the opportunity went to them instead. Here's the part that stings a little. It's rarely the loudest voice in the room that actually wins long term. It's the one who seemed almost quiet about it, who barely defended themselves when questioned, and somehow still ended up getting the resources, the head count, the next project. At the time, it probably looked like luck, or politics, or someone playing favorites. It usually wasn't any of those things. Pay attention here, because there's a reason arguing rarely works the way you'd expect, and it's not about intelligence at all. It's about what happens inside another person's head the moment they feel cornered by your logic. Once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it in every meeting you sit through for the rest of your career. To understand why, it helps to go back to a case that has nothing to do with office politics and everything to do with the exact same instinct. In December of 1903, two brothers from Ohio flew a powered aircraft over a beach in North Carolina. It lasted less than a minute. There was no official body there to certify it, just a handful of witnesses from a nearby life-saving station. And when the brothers tried to tell the world what they'd done, almost nobody believed them. For the next several years, Wilbur and Orville Wright did what any of us would do. They tried to argue their case. They wrote letters to newspapers and scientific journals. They offered technical explanations, descriptions of lift, of control, of engine power, all of it accurate, all of it carefully documented. Some publications ran their claims as a curiosity. Others treated the whole thing as an exaggeration, or worse, an outright fabrication. Even respected scientific circles of the era openly doubted that sustained, controlled flight had happened at all, from two bicycle mechanics no less, with no university behind them and no institution to vouch for them. For years, that's the reputation that followed them. Clever, maybe. Credible, not quite. Notice what they didn't have going for them. No famous last name, no official demonstration in front of a panel of judges, just a small notebook of flight logs and a handful of witnesses from a rural life-saving station, which, to a skeptical newsroom sitting hundreds of miles away, was about as convincing as a rumor. The brothers weren't wrong to feel frustrated. They'd done the actual physical thing, and the world had quietly decided that doing it wasn't enough. It needed to be seen by the right people in a way that left no room for a follow-up question. This is the part worth sitting with, because it applies just as much to you. Being correct and being believed are two entirely different achievements, and mixing them up is exactly what keeps talented people stuck making the same case over and over, wondering why nobody's buying it. Most people lose right here. The rights had the truth on their side. They had documentation, witnesses, working calculations, real flights logged in a real notebook, and almost none of it moved public opinion, because an argument, even a completely correct one, from someone the audience already has a reason to doubt, tends to bounce right off. The harder they explained, the more it sounded, to a skeptical public, like the kind of thing people say when they're trying too hard to be believed. This is where most people in that position would keep arguing. Write more letters, gather more evidence, escalate the case, maybe find a bigger publication to make the argument for them. And it would not have worked, because the room, or in this case, the entire world, had already decided the argument wasn't worth reopening. So the brothers did something else instead. In the summer of 1908, Wilbur boarded a ship for France, set up at a horse racing track outside the town of Le Mans, and started flying, in public, on a schedule, in front of anyone who wanted to watch. He didn't bring a stronger letter. He didn't bring a new chart. He brought a plane. Picture the scene. European aviation figures, engineers and journalists who'd spent years certain the rights claims were exaggerated at best, standing at the edge of a field with their arms crossed, the same posture as that colleague in your meeting. And then Wilbur took off, banked the aircraft in a tight, controlled turn nobody in Europe had seen done before, circled the field, landed it, smoothly, exactly where he meant to, did it again the next day, and the day after that. Something remarkable followed, and it's the part that actually matters for you. Nobody needed convincing anymore. The skepticism that years of letters and testimony couldn't touch evaporated in a matter of days, because there was nothing left to argue about. Journalists who'd arrived planning to write about overstated claims instead had to write about what they'd personally watched happen over their own heads. One aviation pioneer who'd been openly dismissive reportedly admitted, watching from the ground, that the doubt he'd carried for years simply couldn't survive what he was seeing. News of it crossed the Atlantic within days, and the same American press that had mocked the brothers for half a decade started running headlines that read like apologies. That same year, back in the United States, military officials who'd spent years politely declining to take the brothers' claims seriously suddenly found themselves reading wire reports about a Frenchman's astonishment at what they'd already been told about, twice, in writing. The letters hadn't changed. The engineering hadn't changed. What changed is that doubt no longer had anywhere to hide. This is the part of the story people skip, so pay attention now. The brothers hadn't changed their case at all. The physics were identical to what they'd been writing about for years. What changed was the form the proof took. An argument asks someone to trust your account of what happened. A demonstration removes the need for trust altogether, because now they've seen it themselves, and nobody has to take your word for anything. This is where people sabotage themselves without realizing it. And here's the part that cuts both ways. You've probably been the one still writing letters, still trying to out-argue a decision that was never going to be won with words. But you've also, maybe without noticing, been on the other side of it. The one who dismissed someone's idea in a meeting, only to watch them quietly build the thing anyway, and come back with a result you couldn't argue with either. If any part of this is already sounding familiar, drop a comment with just the word that describes that meeting for you. Awkward, tense, whatever fits. I read these, and I'm curious how common this actually is. Take a breath here, because this is where it gets useful. Everything so far explains why arguing so often fails. What's next is what to actually do instead, and it's not what most advice on this topic tells you. Let's bring this back to the room you're actually sitting in, the one with the budget proposal, or the hiring decision, or the process you think should change. Here's what's happening inside your counterpart's mind the moment you start making your case. And it's worth understanding, because it's not personal, it's automatic. When someone hears an argument, especially one they didn't ask for, part of what they're processing isn't just the content. It's the implied hierarchy underneath it. Somebody is teaching, and somebody is being taught. Even a fair, well-reasoned point can register under the surface as, "You should have already known this." Nobody wants to feel that in front of colleagues or in front of themselves. So the resistance you keep running into often has very little to do with your idea. It has everything to do with protecting the sense that they're still the one in control of the decision. There's a second layer to what's happening in their head, and it's just as important. Most people in a professional setting are not actually afraid of being wrong. They're afraid of being wrong out loud in front of people whose opinion of them matters. Your argument, however well-intentioned, puts them in exactly that position. It asks them to change their stance in real time with an audience watching, which is one of the more uncomfortable things you can ask of another adult. A demonstration asks for none of that. It lets them come around privately, on their own schedule, and announce the decision as if it were theirs the whole time. Which, honestly, it now is. This is the invisible consequence, the part that doesn't show up right away. It's not that you lose the argument in the room and everyone simply moves on. It's that you get quietly filed away as someone who pushes, who needs to win the point, who makes meetings a little longer and a little more tense than they need to be. Nobody writes that in a performance review, but it shows up anyway, in who gets pulled into the next high-stakes project, who gets the benefit of the doubt when something goes wrong, who gets the opportunity that seemed, on paper, like it should have gone to you. This is happening in some version of your workplace right now, in a meeting you're not even in. So here's the shift, the one I promised you earlier. Instead of trying to win the room with a better case, build the smallest possible version of the thing you're proposing, and let it exist somewhere your counterpart can see it working before they're ever asked to agree to it. You're not asking for belief anymore. You're giving them something to observe. A small pilot, a rough draft that already solves part of the problem, a single number moving in the right direction before anyone signed off on the plan. Picture it concretely. Instead of pitching your manager on a new process for 2 weeks straight, you quietly run it yourself on your own workload for 10 days. Then instead of saying, "I think we should try this," you say, "I tried this. Here's what happened." That one sentence carries more weight than the entire slide deck would have. It doesn't need to be finished. It just needs to be real enough that agreeing with you stops requiring trust and starts requiring nothing more than looking at what's already in front of them. Or picture it in a slightly different room. You think your team should hire for a role nobody's approved yet. Arguing for headcount is one of the hardest sells in any organization. It's a future cost against a hypothetical benefit, and hypotheticals lose to budgets almost every time, but show up with 3 weeks of a contractor's work already quietly proving the gap exists, and the conversation stops being about whether the need is real. It just becomes about paperwork. You've turned an act of persuasion into an act of approval, And those are two very different conversations to walk into. And we're getting close to the part I promised you. There's a mental model underneath all of this, and it's the part worth carrying into every future disagreement, not just this one. Before you open your mouth to make a case, ask yourself a different question. What's the smallest piece of this I could just do? Not pitch, not present, do. Because the moment there's a result sitting on the table, the entire conversation changes shape. Nobody has to imagine whether your idea would work. They're just deciding whether to keep doing more of something that's already happening. This is also where the mirror flips one more time. If you've been the one waiting for permission to try something, stop waiting for an argument to land and start looking for the smallest version you could just run quietly, on your own time, with your own resources, before you ever ask anyone to say yes. And if you've been the one on the other side, dismissing someone's case in a meeting only to be caught off guard later by a result you didn't see coming, notice that the people who keep outpositioning you were probably never trying to win the argument in the first place. They'd already moved past it, and you were still preparing your rebuttal. There's a real cost to getting this backwards, and it's worth naming plainly. Every extra month you spend perfecting the argument instead of building the proof is a month your idea sits exactly where it started, while somewhere else in the building, someone with a rougher version of the same idea, already running, is quietly becoming the obvious choice for the next opportunity. The window for a good idea to matter is rarely as wide as it feels from the inside. There's one more thing this pattern explains, something most people never connect to it at all, and it's the reason certain people seem to rise through an organization without ever appearing to fight for it. It's this: the less you argue, the more credible you become. Every time you win a disagreement by producing something instead of defending a position, you're quietly building a reputation as someone whose word turns into results. And that reputation starts doing work for you before you even walk into the room. People stop bracing for your pitch. They start expecting your results. That's the actual position worth reaching, not the person with the best argument in the room, the person the room has already learned to trust before they've said a word. And that trust compounds. Every small, undeniable result makes the next one easier to believe, faster to approve, and harder for anyone to quietly outposition. This is worth being honest about, because it's not a one-time trick. It's slower than winning a single argument would feel. The first small proof you build might get a shrug instead of applause. That's fine. That's not the one doing the work yet. It's the third one, or the fifth one, stacked quietly on top of each other that turns into the reputation nobody can argue with. Most people give up right around the point where it would have started paying off, because the first version of this rarely looks impressive. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to be true. None of this means you stop having opinions or stop speaking up when something matters. Plenty of decisions genuinely do need a real conversation first, and no small pilot replaces honesty when something's actually wrong. What this means is that you stop spending your best energy trying to out-talk a decision and start spending it on the smaller, quieter proof that makes the decision make itself. The next time you feel the pull to explain harder, defend longer, add one more slide, treat that as your signal, not to argue less loudly, to argue less, period, and build instead. It's a small change in habit, but it changes how a room reads you over time. The person who used to walk in with the longest deck starts walking in with the shortest one, because half the argument is already sitting there, finished, in the results section. That's not a smaller way of operating. It's a quieter, sturdier one, and it tends to age a lot better than being the person everyone remembers as hard to disagree with. So here's the whole idea, in one sentence. The room doesn't remember who won the argument. It remembers who turned out to be right, quietly, in a way nobody ever had to argue about. You've probably already got a meeting like the one from the start of this video sitting somewhere in your memory, the one where you were right, and it still didn't matter. Except now you know exactly why, and more importantly, what to build instead of what to say next time. If a moment from this hit a little close to home, drop the single emoji that matches how that meeting felt. I'm curious how many of you this lands for. And if this is the kind of pattern you want to keep spotting before it quietly costs you something, subscribe. Because next time we're covering the other side of this exact coin, the small mistake that makes people distrust you the instant you're proven right in front of them, and how to avoid making it in your very next win. You've got the truth on your side more often than you think. Most people in your position do. The difference is what you do with it after the room says no. Stop reaching for a better sentence. Go build the smallest possible proof. Put it somewhere it can be seen, and let it do the talking you were about to do yourself. That's the whole shift. Now go prove it, before you ever have to say a word.